What's really in your dog's food? Well, let me take you behind the scenes of an industry secret they really don't want you to know. From sheep heads with ear tags with plastic and offal being dumped into pits. This is really what happens before it lands in your dog's bowl. And so if you really care about what your pets are eating, this video is going to be for you. My name is Sam, a dog and cat nutritionist and proud owner of a chain of independent pet shops that focuses on nutrition, where every single week we help hundreds of dogs and cat parents with the power of nutrition. Today we are taking a look at how pet food is made and why you should absolutely pay attention to this, especially if your dog itches, especially if your cat has any dietary requirements, especially if your pet is susceptible to any sort of gut issues. This video is going to be absolutely an eye-opener. Now, Dennis King spoke to ABC, Dennis King being the Australian Renderers Association, and he disclosed a few years back how pet food was really made, how meat and different meat and animal derivatives were literally dumped into pits with very little care for welfare and with very little care towards our dogs and cats, and they were getting away with things that would absolutely shock us all. This, of course, is not exclusive to Australia. This still happens, and it happens not so much with the parts of the animals we don't want or with anything nefarious as with the Australian Renderers Association and the scandal that was a few years back, but it happens with the quality of the meat your animal is consuming. Let me take you behind the scenes and explain to you how things are done. In order to make kibble, we have to cook ingredients at very high temperatures, oftentimes twice, in order to render any meat and animal derivatives into a fine powder. That fine powder then needs to be reconstituted, needs to be bound together by a starch or series of starches, and it is done through the process of extrusion, which is how kibble is made. Kibble is made by reconstituting different ingredients being put into a powder so that dog food and cat food can be created. Now, the argument here is not against extrusion. The argument here is not against kibble. The argument here is about what goes into the blender, aka the ingredients. We always say that the ingredients are king, and let me explain to you why. By the way, if you are really curious about making your own dog food for free and you want to know more about the best food for your dog, I highly encourage you to download a free guide, How to Feed Your Dog Better. All the links will be down in the description. The issue of what goes into the blender is absolutely paramount. The issue of how those ingredients are processed is incredibly important, and this is not exclusive to kibble. This also goes for raw, this also goes for homemade meals. Now let me tell you something. The way we choose, pick and select the different ingredients for our pets is going to determine the quality of the actual byproduct. If you think about it, if we take chicken for example, the chicken breast and the chicken thigh will be a lot higher quality than the actual carcass and than the actual rest of the bird. If we put the chicken breast and the chicken thighs into the blender and then we gently dehydrate everything and then we gently cook the whole thing, the nutritional profile of that chicken is going to be a lot higher. Yes, it's going to be processed. Yes, it's going to be cooked. Yes, some of the nutrients might get diminished. However, the nutritional profile of that will be a lot higher than if I take the beak, the feet, the feathers, and the neck, and I cook those lower quality parts into a fine powder. I render all those into a fine powder, and then I combine it with different quality starches to make the kibble. So what can you do? What can you do about this? Well, I would highly encourage you to put your mind into the traceability of things, which is why we are huge advocates for you double checking and triple checking where your dog food is coming from. So if you are dubious about where your dog food is coming from, why don't you give your manufacturer a call and ask them how they make the food? Where do they source the food from? Do they adhere to any trades associations? This is especially true in the raw feeding community. In my experience, there are so many cowboys that we have no idea what ingredients they are using. They are using probably subpar ingredients and subpar quality meats. And then they are selling it to the public with very little care for dogs and with any little care apart from lining their own pockets. Yes, sometimes it is going to be incumbent upon you to do your research and to actually do a bit of digging. Then we, of course, haven't looked at two other very key things. The first one is going to be the lack of traceability of the food. Hear me out. If your dog or cat has any dietary requirements, if your dog or cat has any sort of allergies, you need to be able to know precisely what your dog or cat is getting. If your pet isn't getting something specific and they are getting natural flavors or meat and animal derivatives or vague animal fats on the back of the packet, you will not know what the manufacturer is going to be putting in the recipe. And they will, of course, reserve the right to change the recipe from batch to batch to batch. And this is going to make you lose traceability. Whereas if I say on the back of the packet that I am putting freshly prepared venison in the recipe, I am going to be tied down to that recipe, which is what I want. If we have a dog or cat with dietary requirements, we want traceability. By the way, if your dog has any sort of allergies, we have done free seminars that you can check on the channel, and it will save you hundreds of dollars. Now, the second thing I want to draw your attention to, and arguably the biggest industry secret that no one ever talks about, is China. And China is the factory of the world. Now, a lot of Chinese pet food manufacturers and South Asia pet food manufacturers do not adhere to the same rules and regulations as companies here in the UK, in the US, etc., etc. And so because they don't have the same laws in place, because they don't have the same quality controls in place, they will use a lot more questionable, in my opinion, sources of meat. And I have seen these firsthand because I've met with a few Chinese pet food manufacturers. Now, this is not to belittle or to disparage any Chinese manufacturers that are actually good, but the ones I have seen, the color of the chicken treats, for example, that does not look like chicken. The color of beef, that doesn't look like beef to me. I do not know what those pet products contain, but I can assure you that they are very, very far removed from the labeling they put on the treats or on some of the foods. I actually do not understand why more people talk about this, because everyone who's inside the industry, like myself, know about these things. And people like us, for example, we would never buy treats from China, from certain manufacturers, because we know the low quality or the poor quality of the actual products. And a lot of these products are then put in big box retailers here in the UK. So if you are familiar with some of the biggest big box retailers or big box supermarkets here in the UK or America, you will see these subpar quality products. You will see some translucent chicken strips. You will see some translucent beef strips. A lot of the chicken wrappy things on the bone, for example, those all come from China, and they do not resemble chicken, and they do not resemble anything to do with how things are done here in the West. And this is again not to disparage China or South Asia, because they will do things their way, and more power to them, and we are still importing their products. But I do think that the issue of traceability needs to be talked about a bit more.